Oh, hi there. I'm live. It's a beautiful day today. I'm feeling good. Thank you for joining me, everybody. I hope you're doing well also. And already a good number of you here. I'm going to let you all file in. Thank you so much for being here. Let me just get this situated, get all my devices, all my ducks in a row where they need to be. This is number 85 of my series of live tours through Paris. However, this is, I think in all 85 episodes, this one's an anomaly. I decided for the first time in over 2 years to divert our attention for just one episode. Next week we'll go back to Paris, but this, as you probably know already, is all about Prague. Prague has a special place in my heart as a city, and I'll explain that in a minute. But I thought that I have so much to say and so much to show about Prague, and some things that I think you might find interesting. So that's what this episode is going to be dedicated to. And then I've already got next week's episode in mind that's going to be a real deep dive back into Paris, because of course that's what this series is. If you don't know me already, my name's Corey Frye, aka a French fry in Paris, and I am a full-time tour guide, at least when there's not a pandemic. Now, this is the first episode that I'm coming to you, yes, still from my garden and still from my self-quarantine, but this is the first time since the start of the virus that I've been able to not be completely locked down. So restrictions have been lifted a little bit and people are out and about. For me personally, I've decided to stay home a little bit longer. And so I'm still in my backyard here. I tried to choose a nice sunny spot for us today. I actually tried to line up, because I've got my quarantine coif still today. I haven't trimmed it. I tried to compositionally line up my ridiculous hair with whatever this is here. So I hope you appreciate that. That's the attention to detail that you get when you come to this Paris live series. Let me, if I look down this way, it means I'm checking out the comments, because I don't want to neglect all my live viewers. If you're watching on the replay, welcome to you as well. I'm glad that you're all here. This is the part where everybody says bonjour and hello, and I'll throw that right back out at you. Let's jump into this program, because I have a lot to show you, and I shouldn't dilly-daddle. So why Prague? Why am I choosing Prague to be the one episode that takes us away from Paris? 3 years ago I visited, by the way, for the first time, Prague. I had turned 40 years old, and I had a mini midlife crisis. And one of the reasons was I started to think of all the things that I hadn't done, and things I had promised myself I would do, and then I got to 40, and you assume that those would be checked off your bucket list, and of course the ones that aren't start to be cause for a little bit of anxiety. And for me, it was Prague. I'd always promised myself that I would see Prague. And I realized this is a really stupid first world white guy kind of problem to say, oh, I'm 40 and I haven't been to Prague. You know, that is pretty ridiculous at face value. But for me, it goes back to 1996, and I was 19 years old. And that's when the Prague bug got implanted in my brain. And it wasn't for necessarily lofty reasons, I gotta admit. It was because of a big budget summer blockbuster Hollywood movie called Mission Impossible, starring Tom Cruise. It was Tom Cruise's first Mission Impossible in 1996. And a huge chunk of that first part of the movie takes place in Prague, and it was filmed on location there. And me, 19 years old, didn't own a passport, had never left the US, didn't even plan to ever leave the US. And this idea of, wow, Prague. Not just Prague, but I was discovering that city through this movie. And also it was wrapped up in, of course, the intrigue of Tom Cruise and undercover agents and spies and crime syndicates and, you know, all of these things. So for me, Prague just seemed, in my imagination, a playground for all that sort of stuff. And it was just the idea of Prague back then, when I was 19, was just exotic enough to be beyond the scope of what I could imagine. And that made it kind of sexy and interesting. Like I kind of felt like I knew London and I knew Paris. I had an idea, at least in my imagination, of what those cities could be. Something about Prague, you know, like Central Europe. Wow, so exotic, as I said. And something that just rolls off the tongue, this idea of I'm in Prague, you know, or oh yeah, that time that I was in Prague. It's just something that I always wanted to be able to say. And I know it's silly, and again, absolute first world problem, kind of a bougie problem to have that I hadn't made it by the age of 40, but that's what prompted me to go. So my wife Charlotte and I, we spent a 3-day weekend there. It wasn't long enough, of course, but it gave me a whole slew of photos and stories and things like that. So that's what I'm gonna share with you. one main reason that one thing that was on my itinerary is I wanted to track down the film locations of not only Mission Impossible, but a whole slew of movies. So one fun thing we're going to do today is I'm going to show you some of my photos that were tracking down film locations of various movies that I'm a fan of through the 80s and early 2000s. And hopefully that will add another layer of interest to this episode. What are y'all up to? Well, you're all just saying lovely things. Lois Heiss is saying it's an easy trip from Paris to Prague. Absolutely, I was shocked. It was one of those things, by the time your plane gets to the ascent, it's pretty much, you're done. It's like you ascend and then all of a sudden you hit the max altitude and then you start descending again. Perfect. All right, let's jump right in. So here is Prague. Now, a couple of disclaimers because this isn't going to be an informative historical survey of Prague like I might do with Paris. I don't have, obviously, as good a handle on this, so there will be some monuments that I won't be able to tell you exactly what they are. I won't be able to situate you geographically across the map of Prague because, again, I just don't have that innate sense of where everything is. But I think I've got enough. I've got enough working knowledge of Prague. This is what we're looking at, the main river that runs through the city and the Charles Bridge. Charles Bridge is one of those spots that you will inevitably cross over several times anytime you're in town. It's just one of those thoroughfares and it's an easy way to get across the river. And so you tend to basically, like the Pont Neuf or the Pyramid of the Louvre, I mean, you just in Paris, you tend to just pass along the bridge no matter what a few times. So that's what we're going to start out with here. Angie Parra says, gorgeous shot. Oh, right out of the gate. Thank you, Angie. Appreciate that. The Charles Bridge it started in the 14th century, so there's some good, delicious medieval vibage happening here. And the statuary, as well as some of the architecture, isn't made out of that lighter limestone that we're used to in Paris. So you can see the statues here are very dark, and sometimes the architectures you can see in the lower right, almost like a caramel color. These beautiful ochres, and they're certainly not afraid of color in Prague. So the architecture is full of these yellows and ochres and peachy colors and almost flesh tones. You know, there's almost a, not to get weird about it, but like a fleshy aspect to the palette of Prague. That could have been a cool title to this episode, The Palette of Prague. Lisa Chorney says, it's beautiful and I want to go already. Natalie Hayes loves the feel of those dark statues. Now this one I took because these performers were quite unique. They really went the whole 9 yards. I'm not sure what that instrument is. I think it's got a pretty basic name that has evaded me here. But I took a photo of this mostly because that girl on the left, for me, you know how we have these admittedly stereotypical images of what, you know, women will look like in certain parts of the world, or just people in general. And for me, she looked like an absolute Central/Eastern European type archetype. Super skinny, like beanstalk skinny, really tall, super long hair, always with the long hair, and you know, not quite a mini skirt, but approaching that sort of vibe. And I know that she's dressed here for performing. She was singing, so of course this might not be her everyday wardrobe. But I just felt like I took this photo because like that is what for better or worse, my image of a woman from this area would look like. You know, someone that you might see as perhaps a character in a movie. Sort of like when you have that quintessential idea of a Parisian woman, even though there are myriad variations. This right here, do you see in the distance, there's a tower up there. And does that tower look a little bit familiar to all of you Paris lovers? There is a reason it looks familiar, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Hand pan, someone said. Anna Tinsman said steel drum. I don't quite think it was a steel drum, but I think Trish Greenfield might have it with the hand pan. It's more of those luscious, dark statues. So this is all still on the Charles Bridge, right in the center of town, essentially. Christina Consolé says these colors are everything. I'm so glad so many of you are joining me here. So this is the bottom of that previous statue we just saw. People are locked in. It's like a prison. Obviously, it's playing out some sort of historical event. Now look at this. See, we're going to pause here for a second because we're going to talk in a second about how many movies were filmed in Prague. And for good reason. I mean, first of all, look, a lot of it is laid out almost like a movie set. It literally looks like that, and it just pops on camera, and the streets are aesthetically, visually perfect for so many settings, especially deep sort of historical period pieces that you want to film. But also, Prague is very, there are fewer restrictions if you're a filmmaker. It's also affordable, apparently. There's not quite as many crazy unions that keep things from happening. And so Prague has kind of a very open arms, welcoming stance toward filmmakers. And for that reason, Hollywood independent filmmakers have always flocked to Prague, even when it needs to stand in for a different kind of city, like pretending it's a different city. I mean, this right here, this is like Wes Anderson, right? Like this could literally be a Wes Anderson film. And then here down on the Ks, we're going to talk about that specific movie that got me in love with Prague, which was Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible. This is from that K looking back up at the Charles Bridge. So the movies that, I mean, we're talking The Bourne Identity with Matt Damon was filmed partly in Prague, Casino Royale with Daniel Craig, Les Mis from 1998, not the most recent Les Mis, but in 1998, Liam Neeson and Uma Thurman did a beautiful rendition of Les Mis, and it was filmed here on the streets of Prague. Sean Connery is filmed here, Hugh Jackman, Johnny Depp, Gary Oldman, and on and on and on. But we're going to talk about a few specific ones, starting with my buddy Tom. So Mission Impossible, I don't know if you remember it, it's a while ago for a lot of you, but long story short, there's a mission at the beginning and they're all the team, Tom Cruise's team gets ambushed. And so it starts to play out right here against that wall on the left. And that's why I went here specifically, because I figured all this out according to the movie. Do you see on the left where the pipe is on that yellow wall? And then also the brown doors in the center. So in Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise and another actor and actress come through those brown doors exiting the building, and then they pretend that they're making out because they're secret agents and they need to, chill out there and pretend they're kissing. And I'm going to show you, we're going to switch to a film still, an actual screenshot. And so he's on the left-hand side next to that pipe, which I'm about to show you here. So if you can make it out, those same brown doors are in the center and the river behind. So it was exciting for me because I was such a fan of that first Mission Impossible. And then here is that same view again, so he was there on the left. I get a kick out of that. I hope you do too. Now check out the shape of the staircase, the angles here, and the railings, because in that same scene, he realizes he's getting ambushed and he runs up this same staircase. You can see him towards the right-hand side. He's wearing a tuxedo halfway up the stairs near the right-hand lamppost. That's a little mini Tom Cruise. And then we'll go back to my photo and you'll see it's the same staircase for sure. John Voight in this movie gets shot and he's falling off into the river. So then this square here is where Tom Cruise comes back and he realizes that his team is getting ambushed, and from looking down on that square, he sees his team members blown up in the car. So that's him looking down at this square here, and it was really exciting for me to walk through that movie that made me fall in love with Prague. And if you know this movie, or if you watch it after this, this right here is where a couple of people get stabbed, unfortunately, by some secret assassin, and Tom Cruise has to jump over this fence and run down the little alleyway. And so I thought to myself, what does that alleyway look like? Because it looks rather cinematic in the movie itself. So I got closer to this fence and popped my camera through the slats here. And turns out, no surprise, it's not very poetic at all. It always looks better on the movies, but it was this little back pathway that Tom Cruise was running down. I just think it was kind of fun for me to walk through the film like that. On to some more details. David Dubois just sent me a super chat. Thank you. As did Danielle Molden. She says, it's never been high on my list, but now it is. Gorgeous. I'm so glad, Danielle. Thanks to you and David. I forgot to mention the whole super chat thing, but if you didn't know already, you can send me an instant donation via the little $sign next to your chat box there. A way to give me a tip and support this project. You can also join me on Patreon. There's a link in the description of this video. And we're just going to cycle through some more lovely details before we get to the next movie location, a really exciting one for me. Tom Cruise must have liked filming here because the other Mission Impossible called Ghost Protocol, which came out a few years ago, he came back for that Mission Impossible and filmed in Prague as well. Again, it's a lot easier than other cities for filmmakers, so they tend to gravitate to Prague. Lori Dean says, love the color of the buildings. Keith Heitke says, so European but different than Paris. That's such a great point, Keith, and we're going to pause here so I can address that, because it feels like Paris, but it absolutely doesn't. And you do have some similarities as to the vibe, but I find that it is quieter, it's calmer than Paris. There is also less of a sense of, Paris is just so dense with stuff to do and see that as a tourist, sometimes you can almost get overwhelmed, if you know what I mean. And something about Prague is a little more easygoing, and so I didn't feel as much pressure, even though there's a lot to see. I didn't feel as much of, oh my God, I got to do this and then this and then this. It really helped me to chill out and meander and make my way around. And obviously the architecture is beautiful, but in an entirely different way. Thanks, Kay Perigo, for sending that super chat. I see you there. Big shout out to Kay. Thank you. Andrea Miles says, I loved Ghost Protocol. Well, there you go, Andrea. Angie says, I'm so lost in the photos, which I assume is meant as a compliment, Angie, that you're getting taken over and consumed by the loveliness of these images. I couldn't slow down my slideshow too much because I've got a lot to squeeze in here, and I didn't want to do an hour-and-a-half episode. But this next set of images I'm going to show you, moving on from Mr. Cruise, is a movie that I adore, and I hope some of you are going to get excited for this, because this is one of the major reasons that I plotted out my days in Prague to make sure that I hit up certain locations. There was a movie that came along in the 1980s. I'm going to pull up an image for you, and some of you will recognize right away. Oh, look at that. Amadeus. It is absolutely one of the best movies, whether or not you're a Mozart fan. I think you can hear the smile on my face. It is such a fantastic film. I believe it's 1984, if I'm not mistaken, but it has aged very well. It's a timeless movie. This is Tom Hulce, the actor, who this was just a breakout, one of his absolute best roles as Mozart, and I highly recommend it. Now, this movie was filmed almost entirely in Prague, and one of the great delights for me, having loved this movie so much, was I could go and see these locations. So the house in the movie, at least, that Mozart is meant to live in, is the next image that I'm going to bring up here. So this sat in for Mozart's house in Vienna. So again, Prague sometimes is used as a filming location, but they pretend that it's Vienna or other cities, sometimes Zurich, etc. So they filmed right here for Amadeus, and this was meant to be Mozart's house in Vienna. And you can see the big, beautiful doorway there. Now, I couldn't help myself. I often don't do this, and I certainly don't share these types of photos. But what I did was you see the doorway there with, this is from Amadeus as well. Isn't that beautiful? With the horses and whatnot. And then you switch, you see it's much more saturated nowadays. So as I was saying, I don't often do this, but I had Charlotte take a little rather cheesy touristy shot because I had to pose next to Mozart's fictional door. I got a real kick out of that. Ricky Beltran says, loved Amadeus. Christina says, we got to go to Prague right away, as soon as possible. Trish makes a very good point. She says they loved Mozart in Prague more than in Austria. Yeah, and certainly more than in France. And we're going to talk about that. I went to a theater, visited a theater there that he performed one of his operas in, and he was quoted as saying that the people of Prague really got him. They really understood him, and so he, in real life, was very fond. Lori McCallum says, nice pose. I think my jacket's buttoned the wrong way, actually, technically. So let's move on. This is across from the Mozart house, beautiful details painted on the facade, which you can also see in the movie, in the Amadeus movie. Little archway nearby that we found, and they used this too. There's a scene I believe it's a scene where Salieri, the rival composer, is filmed walking underneath these cool arches. And then we're going to move on to a garden called the Waldstein Garden. And this is also where part of Amadeus was filmed, and I'll show you a couple of stills from the movie as well. Johanny Rodriguez sends a super chat and asks, what was your favorite dish in Prague? I actually got a few photos of that, Johanny, so I'm going to show you that in a moment. I will definitely address that. Thanks for the question. I'll talk a little bit about the food that I ate there and what people recommend you eat. If I can manage to pronounce the names of it, by the way. So yeah, if you're taking notes, this is called the Waldstein Garden. It's beautiful. I don't know the history of who lived here or what happened, but this was used as a filming location for Amadeus as well, and they set up all the actors here. So I just want you to note these arches, and particularly the double pillars that are holding up the arches, because we're about to see them in this screenshot from Amadeus. Those double pillars. Beautiful. In this scene, Mozart is performing for the Emperor of Austria, because remember, this is meant to take place in Vienna. So you can see right in the center there, Tom Hulce's Mozart. And then further in distance, right in the center, sitting down is, I forget that actor's name, but he's very good. He's been in some other stuff. So that was such a treat for me as a lover of Amadeus. So if you do like that movie, Prague is definitely for you. Nancy Brisson says she saw a concert in that garden. Yeah, apparently you can see concerts there, and I didn't quite have time. You can see that underneath those arches are all these beautiful painted frescoes, or faux frescoes, perhaps. Isn't that spectacular? We'll pause on that for a minute. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Cheryl Matzker, she was visiting there as a former student, and she said she never got to just wander around. Pamela Widmer says, I see a Freet detour to Prague in our future. Yeah, some of you Freets, my community members, my supporters, get yourselves together and take a little trip out to Prague. Let me do this here. All right, onward. So the next thing I want to show you, speaking of that theater or Mozart in real life, or moving from the fictional Amadeus movie to real life now. This is called the Estates Theater. And I wanted to go here because in real life, Mozart, who visited Prague 5 times, and as we established, liked Prague and felt like he was welcome there and well received, he went to Prague 5 times, and he decided to, and at this theater, he premiered his famous opera Don Giovanni. Don Giovanni. You'll hear it a lot in that Amadeus movie if you watch it. So I just wanted to see this theater. It was closed because we were there at night, but you can visit it, I guess. You can arrange like guided tours. So this was a thrill. I've been a classical music fan since college, my freshman year of college. And so I always seek out these areas, to tap into the spirit. And we're going to talk a little bit later about that. There's some cool objects related to famous composers that you can also access in Prague. Here is a theater, and this was a filming location of another movie that maybe isn't as famous, called The Illusionist, with Ed Norton. It's a beautiful movie from 2006, if I'm not mistaken, and it's Ed Norton playing a magician. And Paul Giamatti is in it, Jessica Biel is in it. It's really an underrated, beautiful movie, set in Vienna. So again, the film crew used Prague to stand in for Vienna. And this right here was used, I'm going to show you an image from the movie. They look particularly on the ground floor of this theater here, and the arches and the horizontal lines on the ground floor, because you're going to see them in that right there. So that's Ed Norton towards the right bottom of your screen, in front of the billboard there, in front of the sign. That's Ed Norton, and he had just given, in the movie, he had just given some beggar children some coins, some money. So this theater is meant to be the one that he performs in as a magician. It's just a brilliant movie. And then I'll show you again the real life version. So that's called The Illusionist. Now this right here is called the Imperial Cafe, or the Café Impérial. And I wanted to go here for a couple of reasons. we'll talk about the food, but also 1914, just before World War I kicked off. So that makes this very, very late Art Nouveau, the end of Art Nouveau. And all these ceramics and enamel and mosaics and all that stuff that you would expect to see in Art Nouveau. And it's a beautiful restaurant with these columns that almost feel like totems. Now here, if you notice, I mean, the ceilings are gorgeous too, called the Café Impérial. Look particularly at that back wall with ceramics, I assume they are, but those sculpted details, because you're going to see those in the film screenshot that I'm going to show you in this next image. So that's Ed Norton's back as he's entering this cafe, and he's about, in the story at least, about to meet his manager. And there's a scene that plays out. But you can see on the right-hand side one of those quote-unquote totem pillars that I showed you, and then on the back wall, of course, the sculpted elements that I pointed out. So, great movie, The Illusionist. You should check it out. And then I want to show you what I ate. Laura Poffenberger says, wow, I just want to go lie on the floor. Now, I'm embarrassed by this photo because it's a terrible photo. It's just something I grabbed with my iPhone just to document what I was eating. But I got to tell you what it is, because it's one of those dishes that they say you must try when you get to Prague. It's one of their very traditional, authentic dishes. Although I guess it depends where you go. It's called svíčková, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, svíčková. It's beef, slabs of beef with gravy, sort of a sauce, and then dumplings. You will find in Prague that they are big on their dumplings, or some version of it. So very dense, moist, thick chunks of dough. That must be boiled, I would assume. So they're big on that. So this is svíčková. I got this version here at the Café Impérial, and then I got another version a little bit later in my trip that had a variation on it. I'll show you what that was. So this was weird. So you've got the dumplings, which are almost like slabs of white bread, and the same beef and the gravy. But at this place, I don't know if they just do this for tourists or something, but they put a little sweet cake, almost like a madeleine, with a little dollop of jam and then whipped cream, like legit sweet whipped cream, which felt so odd and out of place to me for a savory lunch dish. But I don't know if that's uber authentic or a complete affectation that they do to please tourists. I mean, sometimes you don't know if you're getting the real thing. But this svíčková is something, it's good, it's tasty, something that you should try in Prague. It's sort of like getting fish and chips in London or a cheesesteak in Philly. That's what I would liken it to. Thanks, Maria Canzaneri, for the super chat. She says, oh my God, the dumplings. And she says they are steamed. Thank you. Of course they're not boiled. I'm so dumb. Hey, Haas Manning. Haas says savory and sweet. I can dig it. All right. Pamela Widmer says, I'm on the iPhone and I don't see a $ to send a super chat. You may have to be signed in, Pamela, to YouTube or your Google account. I think that's where people come up against the problem of not seeing the $. Ellen Corradini, I almost missed your super chat. Thank you. She says, your photos are just beautiful. Thank you for bringing it to us. Thanks for bringing us Prague. Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Ellen. Feeling the love here. I want to mention too, I got to give a shout out to a YouTube channel that helped me plan my trip to Prague, and I highly recommend it. This guy who calls himself Honest Guide, and he is based in Prague, and he has a whole channel and just a slew of videos about tips about visiting Prague. He knows it inside and out, and so it's called Honest Guide. I put a link actually in the description of this video, and I don't know that guy, but I wanted to give him some props, because he is the best way to get to the nitty-gritty of how to avoid scams and where to eat and where to go for the best this and the best that and all that stuff. So Honest Guide, you want to check that guy out. Hey, thanks. Another super chat from Leslie T. As always, thanks for the weekly tour. Corey, I love to see even more travels in Europe. I would love to see. Oh, well, that's good to know. That's good to know. Of course, Paris will always be our base, but it'd be fun for me from time to time to share other locations that I've enjoyed. One other dish I wanted to pull up for you. Again, it's a bad photo, I admit. I'm not proud of this photo, but it's roasted duck. Roasted duck with red cabbage underneath. I know it looks very dark, but that is a braised red cabbage, and then more dumplings. And I think that fried onions maybe sprinkled on top. Now this, if I can manage to say it right in Czech, it's pečená kakna. Pečená kakna, which means roasted duck, I think. So that's what you want to. You want to get the shvichkova and the pečena kakana. And that's all of the Czech that I'm going to try to pronounce. If you're a native speaker out there, I apologize on behalf of all of us Americans trying to handle your language. Christina says, get into my belly. This is just an average metro public transportation station. And actually I lied. I'm going to try to pronounce something again because this really made me feel like I was in another world. This language just seems like it would be so beautiful. I would assume, and don't chastise me, I would assume this is pronounced Nadraci Veleslavin. I'm sure I screwed that up, but at least in my mind, it sounds beautifully exotic and takes me back to those days where I was dreaming of being a covert agent like Tom Cruise. Meet me by Nadraci Veleslavin. Sorry, I'm kind of weird for those kind of things. This is their currency. If you were curious, they're called Czech crowns. So the exchange rate between crowns and euros or dollars makes Prague extremely affordable. And that's another great reason to go there. For example, that 100 crown bill that you see at the top, that 100 crowns is worth only about 3.5 euros. What that means is you can come with euros in your pocket and live like a king. You can get in complete meals off of a restaurant menu, like a sit-down proper restaurant menu, for maybe 5 euros, 6 euros, 7 euros, and that's including a drink, a nice beer. Turns out Prague has really good beer, although I'm not a beer drinker, so I didn't get to partake in that, and I don't have any opinion. So yeah, currency-wise, the exchange rate is very favorable to travelers, to tourists coming in. One of their coins, which I thought was pretty fantastic. So what I love too about Prague is you can go up a couple of hills and visit these neighborhoods and museums and monuments and get these views of, for me, what was very surprising, these bucolic pastoral scenes still within Prague. I mean, how absolutely fantastical is that? And I literally mean out of a fantasy. There's some kind of bohemian, exotic, delicious fantasy that plays out when you're in places like this. That's why I want to go to Vienna. I want to go to Budapest. And I was very surprised that there were these huge patches of countryside within the city of Prague. This here, if you see that tower that I mentioned, it's called the Petrin Tower. Petrin Tower, and I'll zoom in here on it. I took another image, another photo that's a little bit closer. The Petrin Tower has a fun story because in the World's Fair in Paris in 1889, of course they built the Eiffel Tower for that, and there was an organization that came, a Czech organization, that went over to the World's Fair, and of course, like everybody, blown away by the achievement of the Eiffel Tower. And they decided to come back, and soon after they would construct something that was heavily inspired. Not nearly as big and grand, but as you can see, heavily inspired by the Eiffel Tower. And it was 1892, so just a couple of years, a few years after the World's Fair, and you can see what an impact the Eiffel Tower had around the world, really blew people away. You can climb it for views, although I did not. I did not have time over the 3-day weekend to go up to the top of the observation deck. I probably would have gotten freaked out anyway with my fear of heights. So I don't have any photos that are closer than this, but that is called the Petrin Tower, P-E-T-R-I-N. And it's not the only Paris link. What's fun about this is I know you're all are Paris fans out there in my audience. There are other links as well. Check this out. There's a part of town, if you don't already know about this might be a fun surprise. There's a part of Prague that is known as Parisian Street. Parisian Street, which is their name for Paris. So what they did was they created a whole avenue that's meant to mimic a Parisian street. So clearly Czech people, I don't know so about nowadays, but clearly back in the day when they were developing this place in the 19th century, they were absolutely in love with the idea of Paris, like so many other parts of the world. So that's what these next few images are from, essentially Paris Street. And I think they based it off, you know, like the classic Champs-Élysées vibe. And it's kind of fun to see. Here it is. This is Paris Street. And you can let me know in the comments, you know, if you think they nailed it or they got close. Or for me, I think it's fun to see Paris, but with a very Central European Czech flavor sprinkled on top, you know. Now you can see on the right that it's a Louis Vuitton shop, and maybe it should be no surprise, but the Paris street, the sort of Little Paris as it's known as, it's where a lot of the high-end stuff is. So this is, you come for, you know, Chanel and Louis Vuitton and Hermes and all that good stuff, Cartier watches. Thanks Pam Widmer for the cafe chat, appreciate that. Sidewalks have this beautiful inlaid pattern, which we don't have in Paris, in fact. So, as a Paris lover, there's yet another reason for you to come to Prague, because you can walk down Parisian Street. And there's another little link, this one a little more indirect, but check out this next image, because in the neighborhood called Malá, which I highly recommend, look at this. It's not Shakespeare and Company, this is called Shakespeare and Sons. But as you can see there on the signage, it's all English language books. I did not manage to get the backstory on this store to see if it came before or after the Parisian one. I assume it came after the Parisian Shakespeare and Company, and I don't know if it was directly inspired or just an obvious name choice. I don't know. There may be a story behind it. But when I came across this, I thought it was pretty damn charming as a Paris resident to see the bookstore Shakespeare and Sons. Oh, here someone says they're missing all of the wrought iron work on the Paris street. Yeah, I guess that's a good point. That's one way if you want to mimic a Parisian vibe and an avenue, then the ironwork is the way to do it. Larry Ayers says 2002 is the date for the Shakespeare shop. So there you go. Thanks, Larry. Appreciate that. Little tag team action. Larry coming in, saving the day with the date. So, again, this neighborhood called Malá, it's very easy to get to. It's next to the river. I recommend it because it's very walkable, and it almost felt to me like a left bank Latin Quarter atmosphere. Christina says, Corey, you've now officially brought you've officially brought Prague to us. Sorry, I got some glare on my screen. I'm so used to saying a different P word. So yeah, thanks Christina. You have brought Prague to us, officially. Maria says the shopping in Prague is crazy expensive. I guess you would really need that exchange rate, Maria, if that's the case. I admit I didn't do too much shopping. Look at these beautiful trams that make their way through. Again, the colors. It really does feel like you're walking through a movie set. Thanks, Elizabeth D. Super chat coming in from Liz. She says, merci for this trip. Look at this lamp. Oof, so good. Look at that artistry. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I have no idea what that sign says, but maybe the sign says wow. I doubt it. So yeah, again, I'm skipping all over the city of Prague. These photos aren't necessarily all next to each other geographically, but this is a fun detail that I found. Lisa Cruz says, wonderful details, Corey. Phyllis Cartwright says, this has officially sealed the deal. Natalie Hayes, who's a daughter, this will be our next trip. Oh, I'm so glad. If I can inspire just a couple of you to actually literally go to Prague via this episode, then I will be tickled. But don't you, like I said, I mean, Wes Anderson would have a field day with his movies. Maybe he has filmed in Prague already. I love this image. This is one of my favorite of the set. What is it about seeing a couple of nuns walking through our modern day lives, which always feels poignant and charming? Or maybe those were extras from a film shoot nearby, who knows? Maria says the sign said pears, when I made the joke that maybe the sign said wow. Jeez, Maria, do you speak, was that Google Translate, or do you actually speak this language? That would be impressive. This is a change of pace here. This is called the John Lennon Wall. It's another attraction, sometimes simply called the Lennon Wall. And it is a kind of a repository, or it attracts street artists and notes of world peace and togetherness, and I think you get the idea, and you can see there. It's the John Lennon Wall, and it attracts a big crowd, as you can imagine. Not just Beatles fans, but it's an attraction in its own right. So Charlotte and I put it on our list, and we managed to find it. So there you go, the Lennon Wall. So here we're walking, if I'm not mistaken, we're walking up toward the general area of Prague Castle. And so we're going to get some good quote-unquote aerial shots, or some up-top shots of the city. Heather Jackson made a joke. Imagine all the people painting on a wall. Yoo-hoo. Well done, Heather. I'm picking up what you're laying down there. God, how stunning is this? Okay, so now we are in a museum, and I won't show you too many museum shots, but there's something that I really wanted to show you here. It's called the Lobkowitz Palace. And this is a museum that specializes in music history, great composers, instruments, etc. But what I want to show you here are a couple of scores, manuscripts, original manuscripts from Mozart, Beethoven, and some other composers. You can start to see them there down on the table at the bottom. So they have, for example, on the right-hand side, you see a portrait of Mozart in the red there. They've got an original score written out by Mozart himself, which again to me was just tickled pink. So not only does Prague have the film locations for that amazing Amadeus movie, but they've got actual manuscripts written in Mozart's hand. And I'm just such a nerd for classical music in that sense, that for me, and history, that just contemplating the fact that he dipped a quill into ink and penned those little eighth notes. For me, it's just that's the whole reason I started dreaming about going to Europe in the first place, and traveling and seeing this part of the world. That's exactly why. I just want to be that close to where Mozart's quill touched the damn score. That's my thing. That's my bag. Thanks, Ricky Beltran, for the super chat. It says beautiful photography. I really appreciate it. So these are all different symphonic scores and manuscripts by different composers. These three here are from Beethoven. The one in the center is his famous Fifth Symphony. And the Fifth Symphony, you've definitely heard the beginning of it. It's the one that goes bum 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 bum. You know. And so look at that sucker. This is the original one from Beethoven, written in his own hand. It's spectacular, and it's a melody that the whole world has heard and recognizes. And again, there you go, Beethoven signed in his own hand. It's so spectacular. Now, for those who aren't really big into classical music, maybe you don't give a flying you-know-what about this, but this next Beethoven manuscript has a fun story, with actually another link to France, believe it or not. It's called Sinfonia Eroica, which means the heroic symphony, but that wasn't the original name. Beethoven was writing this just after the French Revolution, and Napoleon Bonaparte was coming into power as first consul of France, etc. And Beethoven turned out to be a very big admirer and a huge fan of Napoleon. And so he was writing this symphony for Napoleon. In fact, the title of it was literally Bonaparte, named after Napoleon, because Beethoven had saw him in such high regard. But then the unthinkable happened. Beethoven was hugely offended by Napoleon because Bonaparte crowned himself emperor of France, which Beethoven didn't expect, didn't see it coming, and it completely changed Beethoven's opinion of Napoleon, and he decided he's just like all the others. He's going to pop a crown on his head. I thought he was a man of the people and believed in the values of the French Revolution, and all of a sudden, I'm offended. So they say Beethoven grabbed the title page of this score that was almost completely finished, that was called Bonaparte, and he took a quill and he scratched out the Bonaparte name to erase Napoleon's link to his music. And he scratched it out so much. I'm going to show you this image that I pulled off the internet. They actually took a photo of the original title sheet of this symphony, and you can see right there, it's where Bonaparte was written. And that is Beethoven so angry, Napoleon crowning himself emperor, that he goes, no, I'm removing your name from my symphony, and he literally just gouged it out of the parchment. So whether or not you give a damn about classical music or composers, that's a pretty fantastic story. And so what Beethoven did is he renamed it the Heroic Symphony and rededicated it to a patron, a wealthy patron, a prince of his. So there you go. Could have been called Bonaparte, and Napoleon could have had a big old symphony dedicated to him. This was, by the way, Beethoven's third symphony. The one that I sang for you a second ago was his fifth symphony. This is number 3, which I won't sing for you because I don't know as well. Thanks, Belinda Rivera, for the super chat. Really appreciate that. Back to some more strolls through Prague. Hope we're all enjoying this. This is a cathedral. I believe it's called St. Vitus, V-I-T-U-S. I have an image, a couple of images from the interiors as well. Again, that kind of stone, it's what you'll see also like in Alsace, in Strasbourg. Completely different than Paris. This is in the complex known as Prague Castle. Laura Poffenberger says Napoleon named everything else for himself, so he didn't necessarily need a symphony as well. Lucien Despota says, Corey, I love your depth and breadth of knowledge. I appreciate that. This is the inside of St. Vitus Cathedral. And then I think I've just got one image of the stained glass, which I thought was particularly fantastic. Natalie Hayes says, just can't get enough of those European castles. Look at the street signs, gorgeous street signs. Maybe I love them just because they're different from what I'm used to, but my goodness. Now we're going to make our way towards the end of the photos here and wrap up this episode. I knew that I'd end up going like an hour for this episode, whether I wanted to or not, because I just had so much to show you. But if you're a Patreon supporter and you're a member of our private Facebook group, the Cafe Chats group, you're going to want to head over there after this episode, because once again, I'm going to do a cafe chat from my backyard live privately for Patreon members, and I'm going to have a couple of guests, beautiful members of our own community, Yesenia Lopez and her husband Jerry, who are lovely people, and I decided I wanted to get to know them more, so we're going to all drink some cocktails together and have a chat about Paris or the world at large, and we'll get to know them a little bit better. So you can join me for that in our private Cafe Chats Facebook group. If you're not a Patreon supporter yet and you want to be one, then there's a link. There are links all around. Can't miss them. This is again up on top of the hill, either part of the Prague Castle complex or close to it. Again, I'm by no means an expert on the city. Linda Luff says, thank you for this. I appreciate it, Linda. Thank you for being here. Lisa says, your composition is great. I appreciate that. Lori Dean says, Prague's never been on my list of places, but it is now. Thank you so much for sharing your awesome pictures. Thanks, everybody. We still do have a little bit left here of my photos. I thought these were pretty funny. It's somehow part of the parking system. Thanks, Andrea Miles, for the super chat. I appreciate that. So yeah, Prague was really everything that I hoped it would be and more. And it absolutely fulfilled, it lived up to that fantasy that I had when I was 19 years old. You know, wanting to be Tom Cruise, essentially, running through these exotic locales. And I hope to come back. You know, I tell people sometimes that if I'm ever forced to leave Paris for some reason, Prague will absolutely be where I'll be. It, to me, seems like, at least in my mind, the city that holds a candle the most to Paris. I think I could be fulfilled there. I think there's a lot of inspiration to be had, as you can see. So I've done 10 years in Paris. I don't know, maybe I'll switch it up with 10 years in Prague. We'll see. French Fry in Prague's got a pretty decent ring to it. This is a church here that there are actually more photos left than I thought. Sorry if you thought you were getting away. Yeah, there's a church coming up here that was really lovely. May have been also used for the filming of Amadeus. We got all kinds of good stuff. Thanks, Kristen Parker, for the super chat. That's so lovely. She says, gorgeous photos. Thank you so much. Apparently, Kristen, I agreed that the photos were nice because I included so many of them. Sometimes you got to really edit yourself, and this time I did, but then I still had too many photos, and I said to myself, screw it. Let's just spend time together and enjoy overdosing on Prague pics. This right here is the narrowest street in Paris. You can see there's actually a little light, like a stoplight that goes red man, green man to let you know when it's time to go, because otherwise you literally can't pass anybody. It's too narrow. So that's another attraction that people tend to find. Lisa says, I think you mean in Prague. Yeah, did I say Paris by mistake? Ugh. If at any time in this episode I said Paris instead of Prague, you know why. It's because I'm just so conditioned. This is the 85th episode, and all of a sudden I had the bright idea to change up the name of the city, and I thought that I wouldn't screw it up. Thanks, Laura, for the super chat. I appreciate it. She said, thanks for your beautiful tour of Prague. We've got some more water shots here. I promise we're getting to the end. I shouldn't apologize, because there are worse things in the world than having a few additional Prague pictures. I'm just so glad these have been sitting in my camera roll for 3 years, and I'm glad that I found a good way to use them instead of letting them languish unseen. So good. Makes me want to film a movie here, even if I don't know what I'm doing. Heather says, yeah, she's mentioning the my cafe chat guests. Don't worry, Heather. I told my chat guests that this one would run long. I did warn them. This is Old Town Square. This is when you see images of Prague, like tourist websites or whatnot, you'll often see this square. It's pretty iconic. Old Town Square. There's a an old medieval tower right here called Old Town Hall, and there's an astronomical clock from centuries ago. Danielle Molden has a great comment. She says, as much as we love the uniformity and the light in Paris, the variation in Prague is beautiful. Yeah, that's so true, isn't it, Danielle? And it's variation without going out of control. It's still all contained within a certain scheme and a certain palette and a certain sensibility. Look how funny this image is. How great is that? I don't know if that was planned ahead of time. I would love to know the story. Maybe that guy who's called Honest Guide, who has the YouTube channel about Prague, maybe he knows the story behind that. But I would love to know. Thanks, Anna Tinsman, for the donation. She says, I'm happy you finally decided to share your Prague photos. Thanks for letting us take a virtual vacation through your eyes. It's great to have you here, Anna. I really appreciate it. Hopefully this will give you the sense that you can absolutely spend days and days and days in Prague and never get bored, never run out of stuff to see. I believe this is called the Strahov Monastery. And they've got these beautiful libraries, which are one of the main draws. Look at this, look at this. Some movies have been filmed here as well. Love a good old historical library, don't you? Wow, 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 wow. So yeah, the Strahov Monastery, if I'm pronouncing that at all correctly. Here's the church that I was mentioning earlier, actually. Look at that organ. Oh, the colors, the greens. There's something about the Prague greens. You're gonna see it in a chapel actually coming up here in a few seconds. Man. I've said it before, but there are some colors I just want to eat. I want to put them in my mouth. Look at that. I almost want to lick my screen as I'm watching this here along with y'all. John Wood says, loves the library, yeah. I think this building might have been used for the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, the Sean Connery movie. There's also a fun Hugh Jackman movie called Van Helsing, which is a kind of a silly thriller / horror movie about vampires and werewolves and whatnot. But Hugh Jackman was awesome in that movie, Van Helsing, and they filmed it here because they needed like old, dirty, medieval cobblestone streets, and Prague can be a great resource for that. We're getting close to the end. Actually, one of my all-time favorite shots of this whole set is coming up, and I'll point it out in a sec. I was going to use it for the thumbnail, but it didn't quite fit with this one right here. Look at that. I'm pretty proud of this image because I think that this could be, like, if you just wanted to portray an atmosphere or a feeling. Again, who knows what the signage says, but I just thought that this was, it looks theatrical, doesn't it? I mean, I've been saying that over and over, broken record, about it feels like a movie set. Well, look at this. This is so great, and I promise there are only like a few more photos. I almost saved one of the best for last, at least in my opinion. I'm really happy with that one. Oh, so fun. So thanks everybody. I'm not going to draw out this goodbye. I know that we are in fact coming up on the end of this. And thank you. Oh, Ellen Fry, my mom showed up right at the last minute, under the wire. She says, great photos, Co. Thanks as always. Yay, Prague. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate you being here and all of you. It's been lovely to have this support. And the sun is setting here on Prague, as you can see. So we're winding down. This was absolutely, I think it should be at the top of anyone's list. It is absolutely magical and fantastic and affordable. And as you can see, it's, you know, architecture and the river and movie history and classical music history and beer and food and all kinds of stuff. So we're going to finish right here. Finish up with the old thumbnail shot. And there you have it. We are officially 1 hour in. Let me turn on my lamps here. Officially 1 hour in, and I think it's time to go. I always drag out these goodbyes, but as you can see, I'm still in my backyard. If you're not a Patreon supporter, you might want to keep it in mind. You might want to go there. Right now, all of us, we're going to go into the Facebook groups, the Cafe Chats group as usual, and I'm going to join a couple of guests, but not before I grab a whole lot of champagne and a whole lot of snacks and goodies. So I guess the sun is... Anyway, I hope you're feeling well wherever you are, feeling good in here and feeling good in here. We're going to get around the corner of this, I promise you. And I'm going to see most of you in Paris and maybe occasionally in Prague. Who knows? Thanks for joining me on episode number 85. If you can't bring yourself to Paris or Prague, I'm going to bring it to you. And as I said, next episode, we're going to come back around to Paris. I believe the title of that one is going to be The Private Paris They Let Me See. It's all going to be about getting in behind closed doors, unexpected doors opening for me, and the stuff that I found and discovered. So it's going to be stuff that you won't see anywhere else. The Private Paris They Let Me See, something to that effect. So join me, same bat time, same bat channel, and in about 10 minutes or so, Yesenia and Jerry, I'm going to see you over for our chat. Take care, everybody. Bye. Hope you're doing all right. See you on the next video.